All right, great. Looks like we're live. So, hello, my name is Sara Bowden. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a Mason Corps member. Mason, Marching Arts Access, Safety, and Inclusion Network, is a community-led effort dedicated to increasing equity and safety in the marching arts. We believe in accessible, inclusive, and equitable marching arts for all, and a culture of safety where scores, costs, or positions of power are never prized above health or well-being. This is our fourth Real Talk Town Hall, and we're so excited to welcome four incredible panelists for tonight's discussion titled Trans in the Marching Arts. Please feel free to direct your questions for the panelists to us on Twitter at Mason Network or in the comments of this live stream on YouTube. This event is also being live tweeted and a recording will be saved to our YouTube channel after the event ends. Without further ado, I'm going to call on each of our panelists for a short introduction, and then we'll dive right into our first question of the evening. Can I hear first from Jenna?
Hi, I'm Jenna Bartz. I teach band and orchestra in downtown Kansas City, and I have been involved with marching arts since 2010. I marched 3 years in DCI, and then I taught on the staffs of a couple of different drum corps since then as well.
Great. VL?
Hi, I'm VL, and I use they, them pronouns. I spent 4 years marching DCI from 2011 to 2014. I marched 5 seasons of DCA from 2015 to 2019. I teach elementary general music. And
thanks for joining us. Can I hear from Jer?
Hey, I'm Jer. My pronouns are they, them, and I first got active with marching in 2016 with the Bluecoats. I marched 2016 and 2017, and then I taught a year DCI as well in 2018 with Pacific Crest, and I've been teaching high school marching band at various schools since 2013. So I've been teaching quite longer than I've been marching, and aside from that, I am also like a YouTuber, freelance session musician. My involvement in marching is definitely more of a side thing than like my main thing. So,
thanks for joining us. And last but not least, Kaneathan.
Hey, I'm Kaneathan. I use he/him pronouns. I'm currently a senior in college down in Georgia, going for music education. I've marched 6 years of drum corps, and I'm just getting into the education field.
Wonderful. We're all so happy you're here. I wanted to pose our first question of the night, which is, what are ways that overt or covert homophobia and transphobia come out in the marching arts? And more specifically, can we locate this within a specific section or dynamic? Whenever you're ready, just unmute and go for it.
I think that the most apparent way that we see transphobia and homophobia really pushed starts as soon as kids really walk in that door, with the way that a lot of the administration decides to start how camps are started. Students aren't often asked for pronouns, and they're often put into sleeping areas that are separated by gender. And so that's at least my personal stance on where I see a lot of transphobia and homophobia, not consciously pushed, but it's there, for, like, in the front the most.
yeah, I just wanted to build off of that a little bit. And I was thinking about saying something very similar to that. Something that I've always found very interesting is like, I feel like the reason that they split, it's like kind of like, it is homophobia, but it's also just a weird dynamic to me because like they split people up in like sleeping areas for like, oh, if guys aren't sleeping with girls, then nothing can happen. And like that kind of just like erases the fact that you're just putting guys together or girls together. And so like, what's the point of even doing that separation when it's not going to stop anything? And like, I feel like corps should have much more of a direct, like, I guess, talking to, and like, obviously you should treat your members like adults and just tell them that, hey, there are responsibilities to these things. And it should kind of they should go more with that type of approach in those regards, because to me, it just doesn't make sense whenever corps do stuff like that. And a lot of this stuff can be avoided if there was much more like honest conversations happening from like admin and staff with members, and if there was more transparency with these things.
I think there are interesting expectations that are enforced in terms of sort of how people perform their gender throughout the season and in drum corps. I know my experience with it was that, you know, the guys in the color guard could behave and dress in certain ways, but if anybody in the brass or the especially in the percussion would have acted those ways, it would have been handled very differently. And more negatively, I think, in a lot of cases.
I find that the staffing choices that a drum corps makes, like before the season even starts, sets up a lot of the homophobia and transphobia that I've experienced. Like when, when I first started marching, I know like corps don't think, oh, like what does this person post on their social media? Like, are they like, have they like done posted anything homophobic or transphobic? Like, what are their views on that? Because people didn't really know about like non-binary people and pronouns, and like I had the unique experience of being out as non-binary myself my first year in 2011, but not really even knowing what the word non-binary was, and like people didn't really know what to do with me. And just like even going forward, like from there, like the amount of like blatant transphobia and homophobia that like corps directors or people who are hiring staff will tolerate from staff is just how like it sets the scene right away. Especially in like a section in the sections that have the most like cis white heterosexual guys in it, which is always the drum line from my experiences. And like for whatever reason, like the staff and the members are always like the people I felt the least safe around in drum corps, and their actions were like they were never held accountable for that. And like so just like directly from a staffing point of view, like there are people allowed to teach drum corps who like don't know a lot about us and don't know a lot about people who aren't them, and that's where I found a lot of the issues started.
Yeah, I feel like a lot can be said about that specifically, but also like um, everything that has just been stated, especially with like organizations that have no sort of accountability for like members or staff saying things. Mostly like there's been times where I've marched and someone will say something really out of pocket, really homophobic or transphobic, and staff might not necessarily like, you know, laugh at the joke, but they'll just ignore it. And as the more that they ignore those things, the more it enables like, you know, these like cis straight dudes to keep making jokes like that. And, you know, the culture never really dies because of that. So, you know, if I was running a corps, if I was a corps director, I would have like zero tolerance for that stuff. And if it was impossible, because, you know, like this also speaks outside of like, if with any issues in drum corps with like who they hire, if you can't make a successful corps that doesn't involve hiring, you know, dangerous people or people that are there, like you shouldn't be running a corps. Like that's my honest opinion. And corps should put up more priority into that over wanting to get a ring or wanting to make finals. Like you can experiment with different staff and risk it if it means the risk making finals or whatever, if it means the safety of your members. I think that should come first, and then you build your program up to score better or whatever.
Oh yes, I want to build on that exactly. What are some of the ways that the marching arts push away trans and non-binary people in terms of what the activity values or looks for in members?
I know that actually a dear friend of mine has had was told by a staff member at a certain corps that they were not contracted because they didn't fit the specific gender conformity that the horn line wanted from them at that moment. And so I know, especially, you know, being a heavier trans person, I've seen that in multiple ways of the way that drum corps decides to be exclusive. And I think that's something that a lot of kids, especially young high schoolers, really struggle with once they come into drum corps.
Drum corps is like everything is tailored towards like a cis male body, especially from like marching technique and teaching visual and what you value in like the perfect visual member. It just like the exclusion of all other body types except like the skinny cis male body type is just like that alienates like that. It just like ripples on outward from that. And I forget what the question is, but like I know I'm in the right zone.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're totally on point, and that's particularly why we see a lot of trans masc students have a little bit more success than trans femme students in this activity, right? Because there's a little bit easier time folding into the cis male body type, or even being told, this happened to me when I was read as femme for my entire marching arts career, not expressing emotion, not looking tired. And that can look gendered. Ways of speaking to your students can look a million different ways. So I think you're totally on point with that, VL.
I know some corps also make creative sorts of decisions to have, you know, the boys and the girls do different things with like their hair, with their bodies. And I actually had an experience when I was teaching. I had a student who was in the closet, and it was decided that all the boys needed to cut their hair. And so the student was put in the situation of, do I cut my hair or do I come out all of a sudden? And she ended up cutting her hair. But I think sometimes decisions like that and any space that is set up to where there are binary options and you are assigned into one of those options can potentially create trauma for students.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially what I was about to talk about kind of piggybacks off of that, where like corps will make a lot of decisions, especially something like that, to like a cis person or someone who has never really like thought about their gender identity, they might not see something like your hair being important, you know, like cut it for a show, but like for a lot of people that's like a huge part of their identity, and the same can go for like other ways that we present ourselves to the world. So I think it's kind of like, and that's something that could be avoided again if like these corps like had the conversations, and you know, if there was somewhere for a corps for a queer person or trans person to reach out about any sort of concern. Like no drum corps has that, you know, like and to me that's kind of a problem that the corps don't make it an effort to make sure that their space is inclusive for everybody or to ask these questions. And the whole activity I've been taught from like when I was in high school until now, and when I teach now, is that it's supposed to teach you about, you know, being a better person in society and teach you like discipline and stuff like that. So it's like, how are you going to preach that drum corps is about making people better, like more productive in society, but you're not teaching how to like engage with society with other people that don't look exactly like you? So it's like, which one is it?
I had a tech that was like everyone in the world should do drum corps because drum corps makes you a better person. And I thought I believed that like really early in my marching career, but like it doesn't. Like there's so many things that go into being a good person, and just because you can like survive 12-hour days in the sun end on end doesn't make you a good person. Just because you work hard doesn't make you a good person. Like there's I forget the question again, but that just made me think of that, and how like this is how staff will say things and then they don't, you think about them later and like it doesn't make sense, and like this person had an influence on me and people around me, and like but it wasn't the right influence. I
find often staff will make a decision to say something that is meant as a form of social control for their students. So sometimes it's hearing a platitude like that is enough to get a student through a block. And you think about it and reflect on it years later, it's quite different. I want to move a little bit into the positive side of things. So as part of being pushed away and pushed out, I find it's really interesting that the marching arts can also work as a liberatory space for trans, non-binary, and queer people. For example, I got into makeup for the first time in my entire life because I was involved in the Winter Guard. So I got to explore really feminine self-expression. And I wanted to hear about any of those kinds of stories from all of you.
I know right as I was really starting to accept and express myself more as being trans masc was right as I was going on World Class Tour for the first time. And so that chance for me to get to go somewhere completely away from my family and the people at my school really allowed me to assert myself and be like, hey, I'm Kane. I use he, him pronouns. And I know a lot of people that I marched with have mentioned like, oh, well, you're the first trans person that I've met while on tour. And so I think even for a lot of younger queer people, that allows them the opportunity to be around other, I guess, more experienced, like queer people who are more developed within their queer identities.
There's also a lot of like support systems that exist in the activity, and oftentimes, like, I mean, this whole thing is about kind of giving a lot of critique on how there's a lacking of that support. But from like individual standpoints, when I was marching, and I wasn't even out about being non-binary yet, there were still so many people I met who I saw them use correct pronouns for other people, and I saw them like, you know, get mad at people being homophobic or transphobic, and that like made me feel more comfortable because it was not like all 154 members marching are like transphobes. That's definitely not the case, and hardly ever is the case. And there's even times where I have seen staff kind of intervene and be like, that's not cool, don't say that or don't do that. So I feel like there are a lot of, you know, people, and I would like to say that there are more people who are more well-intended than not in the activity. And even that little bit is important because like for someone like me, I found out about being non-binary and like gender identity stuff through like people I met through punk rock. So punk rock's a little more already like anti-system, and going into a world like drum corps, I was very like, that was like my biggest worry was like, am I going to be surrounded by a bunch of people that everything about me is like they hate? And seeing that reassurance from so many people in the activity definitely helped me a lot through my years marching.
When I first started marching, you know, earlier I talked about kind of some of the like gender policing, like gender expectations and stuff that are there, but in some other ways it could be very freeing at times. Like when I first started marching, that was the first time I felt, I guess, like I had permission to wear shorts that weren't like below my knee. And it was a really weird experience for me. And it was one of those things because I was still completely in the closet at that point. And so for me, it was like this weird feeling of like, oh, I kind of like this, but probably not for the reasons that anybody else does. And so it was an interesting opportunity that way. But also for me, I grew up in a very white, like suburban Midwest area, and marching drum corps was the first time that I guess had to be in close proximity to queer people, because there were queer people at my college, right? And I didn't start marching until after my freshman year of college, but you know, I didn't really interact with them very much because I didn't have to. But when you're living with people, you do interact with them. And so for me, it was exposure and just learning about people in a way that I had never had the opportunity to before that point.
For me, I was always the first like I was the first non-binary person I knew, and I was pretty much everyone I met in those earlier years, everyone's first non-binary person. I felt like there weren't a lot of people who knew enough to support me when I wanted to like try out more transmasculine stuff. And like I'm so glad that I can be there. I can be here for like all the other like trans and queer people who are coming out in Jump Corps now. And in like the final few years of DCA that I marched, I know that I've been able to help people kind of realize like who they are and being comfortable. But like I'd never had that, and I always had to be by myself, and I always had to be the person I looked up to. So I just want to express that like I didn't get to have that experience.
Absolutely. And on the note of helping, we have a question from the audience. Someone on admin staff is asking, any advice for finding the balance between making all members happy and realistically accommodating them? It seems impossible to be completely inclusive, accommodating. I'm wondering if you all have reactions and thoughts about that.
I think especially with the way that the activity is now, the best thing to do is just start with the small steps. We can't always cater to every single thing, but if you start taking everything with little baby steps, eventually you'll find yourself in just completely surrounded in the inclusivity that you've been looking for.
Yeah, we've been talking about different binaries in the drum corps activity, and I think speaking to your students and deconstructing these binaries, really interrogating why we have them, that's definitely a place to start. Locating and situating all of these things, binary sleeping areas, seat partners, buddies, things like that. I think that's a good place to start thinking about changing the activity to be more accommodating in ways, small changes like Kaneathan has said, to help your members.
Like it might not seem like a big deal, like the words that you say, but like if you're an admin and you're like regularly like addressing groups of like core members, like stop saying ladies and gentlemen or anything gendered. Like just remove it from your vocabulary completely. And like that just does so much. Like just you saying something, like all the trans kids will like know, oh, this person is aware we exist and that some of us are not binary. The things you say really make a difference. And like, we know that you're going to slip up sometimes, but if you practice and you think about it and it's a conscious part of your life, like, then you're not going to mess up. And we're going to know if you practiced and how much you're thinking about us by what you say and how you're addressing groups. Because like I never said anything like when I was marching, but like every time it just felt like a microaggression. But like if I said something, like what would people say about me? And how would people treat me? And those are always things I had to think about, like to fit into this perfect mold of someone who's not complaining about anything, who's just accepting and like being like, okay, I'll do it, and never speaking up. Like there's just just removing that whole obstacle by just using inclusive language is just such a big step.
Well, and I think even more broadly than that too, when it comes to like how many accommodations should you make, I think the main thing to do is center your students and what they're going through and what they're feeling and experiencing. You know, somebody earlier mentioned that it's pretty uncommon for corps to ask for pronouns on like your audition form or when you sign up or whatever. And, you know, that's like a really good starting point. But then, you know, if you catch wind of the fact that students might be in need of something, or if you just can figure that out in whatever way, talk to the student about it, like see what they need, see what they're feeling. And I think if it's a question of, you know, I would like to accommodate you, but here are the obstacles to that, like, see what the student feels about that. And I think a lot of cis people would probably be surprised at just how harmful that can be. But if you are coming at it from a place of you want to create the best experience for all of your students, and you really have empathy for your students, I struggle to think of an example where the line wouldn't be to just like accommodate the student, like find a way to make it work. Um, I can't think of a good counterexample where you don't accommodate the student and make it work.
The only thing I can think of is maybe a shower situation, because I know that has always been like a big thing. And I'm not sure what core this was, but I did hear of a situation where there was a trans man marching out of core and they just had him shower first while everyone else was showering, which like is definitely so they tried to do something and they actually, you know, made an effort to, okay, so he's comfortable showering there and then everyone else is obviously not involved. So like, you know, so that's the only thing I can think of as like an example. But like my question would be, if that was the situation, did y'all try to set up a certain shower time? You know, like if everyone else is eating food, as long as when he gets out of the shower, he has food available, like what's the issue there, you know? And that's like kind of the whole point of this stream, and of course kind of taking these actions, is there is no how to trans member handbook in DCI. It doesn't exist. But like as people start to take the initiative to do something, answers will come up and solutions will be made, and eventually one core will figure out something that works really well for everybody, and then that word will travel. Someone will go admin at another core and do that same thing there, and then solutions will start to happen. So I think posting in like maybe some groups and asking if there's other cores that are also have solutions to your issues, whatever they may be, and see if anyone has that. I don't think anyone on this call necessarily can think of any issues that have come up, but I guess that would be a good step in that regard.
I would say too, though, even when it comes to like showering situations and the question of what to do with the showers, like if you force a student into a separate accommodation, that's not great. That can be very othering. That can be very invalidating. If the student wants to do that and is comfortable with it, awesome, let him do it. But I think there's a line there somewhere of if you say you don't belong in either of these spaces, go to your own box, that's harmful, right? Like that's not good. But if you give them the option and let the student do what they're most comfortable with, then you're centering that student's experiences and creating a space where they do feel safe and they do feel welcome.
Absolutely. And part of being professional is being transparent with your students about the accommodations you're needing to make. Trans students in the marching arts have been finding ways around binary ways of existing for a while, whether it's sleeping on a different area of the gym or showering before everyone else. So just acknowledging these binaries and talking with your students to develop a solution for them specifically is one great way to approach every situation. There's no one size fits all, as people on the panel have already said. So that leads us to our third question. More trans and non-binary people in the activity offer a chance to reimagine the parts of marching arts that are archaic and meant to reduce liability, like gendered sleeping areas, the shower question, as an extension of anti-trans bathroom bills legislation. Let's look at it and give it that lens specifically for what it is. What are some ways cis people in the activity can reframe gender marginalized members, staff, designers, as assets rather than liabilities?
So this kind of brings up the whole like showering situation again, but I've been thinking about this sort of, I forgot the word for it, but basically this system for showering that if cores actually used it, it would make everything so much more efficient. It would help out with, you know, the food truck and all of that. And it's this idea of you know, splitting showers based into 3 separate groups and separating by age. So you'd have first, let's just say like people who identify as female, you would have them go first, split probably it's 2 locker rooms, split them into separate locker rooms by age. And then next you would have probably people identify as male. You would have them go, split them by age. And then next, you could offer that opportunity for anyone who identifies as gender nonconforming or who doesn't feel comfortable, creating a smaller, much more like safer environment for anyone who doesn't want to shower with everyone else. And by mixing that with a, I guess, like a food truck block shift, something, you can limit like how much stress you're putting on your food staff who's trying to get food to all of these kids. Plus, normally without this sort of system in place, these kids are going to be standing in line for like 10 minutes anyways trying to get food. They could better utilize that towards showering, getting some decent rest, taking care of themselves. And that's my thought.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that real quick. When I was marching, I actually showered before I ate food. When block ended, I would go back to the sleeping areas and take a shower. And by the time I got out of the shower, no one was in line, and then I was able to easily get my food. So like, I definitely agree with that, and that's just an example of ways to experiment with new things. There's like kind of this idea, especially in drum corps, I've noticed, where people think things work the best because it's the way it's been done. And that's necessarily, if anything, far from the truth, because just because something has been done a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's the most effective or productive way. And I feel like more groups should open up their minds and start to brainstorm on these types of things and what they can change on a day-to-day basis to help accommodate more people in general.
Yeah, if I can reframe us just a little bit, I wanted to talk about just a little anecdote that happened with me as a marching member the year that I was out as non-binary. And I was helping my cis male baritone section members discover their own identities. And this kind of, what could have been a source of conflict was actually a really productive discussion when a member asked me, how do you know you're transgender? And my response was, how do you know you're cisgender? And we had this really interesting discussion about gender and how trans students, when they connect with others, and cis students connecting with trans students, can really help us understand ourselves. So I wanted to hear about moments like that.
I don't have like a story like that or anything, but I will say that I think welcoming trans and non-binary people into your creative teams and into your, like the admin teams and your instructional staffs, I think creates a much broader diversity of perspective that can potentially lead to a lot of really valuable outcomes. Probably, I mean, I don't know. I would think that particularly in the field of like show design and creativity, like more lenses that people see things through and the more perspectives that people bring to the table can really kind of push the envelope in some ways. So I would say that's a way that welcoming trans people can be a lot more of an asset than a liability.
Absolutely. And while our other panelists are formulating responses, we do have another question. What are the types of performative allyship that you have experienced, if you're comfortable sharing, in the marching arts? And how can we productively use such moments to teach meaningful allyship?
So the story that stuck with me the longest was in my first year of world class. We had just gotten to Louisiana, and unfortunately, I had another member, as we were leaving a show site, call me an it while we were on the bus, and it caused a very intense situation because thankfully I was sitting around other allies of mine and good friends of mine. And the unfortunate thing that happened was I was never backed up by staff. staff members who had spent the entire summer affirming me, giving me, all of their best and saying that they supported me. When that time came and when I really needed their allyship to be proven, they didn't send the member home because we didn't have enough members. They chose to keep him on the field with me constantly for the rest of tour instead of to actually send him home. And so I think, relating my story to this, you can say nice words to your students and do whatever you want, but you also need to know when to act and when to genuinely back up your students and recognizing when a serious situation does happen.
Kaneathan, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for sharing that. That's really intense.
I need staff to stand up to other staff members who say transphobic shit. And whether it's like sometimes something that they overhear or something that a member comes to them and tells them about. Like I need other staff members to keep each other in check.
And to build on that, I think in every staff that I've been a part of, there's been it's been a really important value that like you don't create tension among the staff in front of the kids, like you don't have disagreements or anything. But when it comes to that kind of stuff, when it comes to statements that are harmful for a student, and particularly if it's got some amount of bigotry behind the statement, I think it's really important as a staff member to say something in front of all of the people involved to send a message that this sort of thing is not okay, actually, and I'm going to let everyone know it right now in front of you.
I feel like, especially like kind of to build off of those last two statements, when it comes to like staff issues, my question is, if things like that happen and they happen continuously, like what is the staff members of those allies doing? Like, are you going to the core director? If it's a brass staff, are you going to the brass caption head? If the brass caption hasn't doing anything, are you going to a director? Because at the end of the day, the success that the directors see come from the work that the members put in, and the success that the brass caption head gets comes a lot also from the brass staff that does the work of teaching on the ground and doing the weeks of tour that the caption head isn't doing and being on the field. So like, we have to understand that drum corps is built from the members up. We don't serve the caption heads. We don't serve DCI. We don't serve these people who are on top that often, one, get the biggest paycheck, which is kind of weird. And two, also they get a lot of the credit. It's like, why aren't the techs in the DCI Hall of Fame, the ones that are the ones teaching the pedagogy? Like, it's like things like that. It's like at the end of the day, you're not going to know the names of the members. Maybe if they're like a soloist who marched 17 years and had 23 solos over that time, you might know their name, but like even like one time soloist, people often don't know their names or anything like that. So like, to me, it's kind of weird how like the members are the ones who make the corps like great and give them all the success. But then in these moments, they're not prioritized, especially like obviously the members who are parts of marginalized groups. So I think it's the directors and these people in the higher ups responsibility to handle these situations when that happens. So if you find yourself in a situation where you've spoken up, but you feel like your voice wasn't enough as an ally, then the next thing you can do is get other people who are allies, and as a what's it called, unit, go to your like caption head or your core director, because at the end of the day, like, there's a power in numbers. Like, people working together can make change if you feel like you yourself can't.
Absolutely. And I want to underline that allyship, meaningful allyship, is about connection. And it's been very meaningful and validating to me to have had past instructors after the season, even if they've said something that was really traumatic or harmful to members speak to me about this and show me that they have actually done a lot of work and learned, and that they want to be better for their students. So I just want to extend a thank you to any instructors who are doing that kind of work for their students, and that being your student is a relationship that continues as an ally beyond just the marching arts season. So yeah, I think we're ready to move into our last question of the evening. So this could have looked like a lot of things. This town hall could have been a vocabulary lesson, but we really want to underline that you have to ask your students what they need. Asking your trans and non-binary students what they need is just the starting point. For educators who are watching and wanting to support all of their students, people on this panel, what would have helped you the most while you were marching?
I think to make it, especially given my last story that I gave, the most that would have helped me while marching would have been a more vocal staff, people who weren't going to solely like put the weight of my gender identity on me during tour, and would have lived up to being an ally and actually done more research with people just besides me personally about what I needed.
Yeah, just people being more vocal in general. There was a lot of instances where like things had been said that were like really triggering for me, that other people would say, and like I could tell the vibe was not everyone like necessarily thought it was funny or agreed with it, but at the same time no one ever like said anything. And I'm not like faulting any specific person. I'm not like holding any grudge towards anyone for that. It was just the culture, but like that's like the problem. It's the culture, and that culture needs to be like destroyed and dismantled and replaced with a much more healthy culture. And that starts with obviously the individuals. And if I'm ever back teaching in the activity, I'm gonna, speak up and use my voice a lot more than I did. But at the same time, it really shouldn't be put on like the trans members and trans staff to be the ones using their voice all the time when no one else is. I would hope that if I say something, then I have the support of the allies to, make sure that I'm not the one the only one who's continuing to say the same thing over and over again.
I just wish that people did their own research before asking me like about my gender in a really insensitive way. Because if they had like just done a Google search, like I found out I was non-binary by doing a Google search. So like, why can't you? So stop asking me like really rude and like stop asking me these questions. Like my first summer I didn't even identify as non-binary yet because I didn't know the word. I was just like, yeah, I'm not a girl or a boy, and like whatever. Like I'm using the women's locker room, that's fine with me. I'm using the girls' bathroom, but like if you ask me, like I'm really having like some gender questions, and like I know that I had like at least one tech be like, so like what are you? Like it was a rough summer. Just do your research. There's so many good sources online. I think that actually will pop up before all the bad sources do. Like just if you want to know like a trans kid's like specific identity, like just do some research before asking them, so they don't have to explain everything to you. So you don't have to be like, oh, I've never heard of that. Like if you did a Google search, you would have heard of this identity.
Yes, and with that, there are so many trans people everywhere. And so if your first instinct is to just turn to someone and ask them, because this is the only trans person you know, it's worth asking why this is the only trans person you know, why this is the only trans person in your life. What's brought them to your life? Are you just working on a staff together, or are you really there for that person?
So my answer for this one is pretty different, I think, because when I was marching, I was not only very deeply in the closet, but also very deeply in denial about what I was feeling and who I was. And For me, the thing that would have made just the biggest difference would have been just seeing any successful and happy trans adult. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you could be happy and also be trans when I was that age. And so like having one member of staff to like look up to would have been huge for me. So I guess if you're on an admin team, hire trans staff members because it's really important.
And trans staff members are constantly looking to work in this activity. I feel like a lot of people act like it's not, it's like impossible, especially like, and that goes for any diversity in staff. And it's like, when I was marching, like half the staff that taught me was Black, and to see like there's like barely any diversity in race on other staffs is kind of mind boggling to me, especially for how many like people of color march. You would think that there'd be a lot of them applying for job positions. And I have seen many talented Black people I've marched with get denied like jobs in the activity. And I've also seen like many talented gender queer and not cis straight men get denied. So like that's an internal question as well for anyone watching, whether if you're in the position where you're doing the hiring or you're working, start asking yourself the questions. Why is that? Why is at the end of the day, like, it's mostly white dudes, straight white dudes who are teaching and in these positions? Because it makes a huge difference to have that like sort of representation, not to like get the we did it, we're diverse like card, but because you just shouldn't have those biases in the first place. And Sarah said, there are trans people everywhere. If you don't, like, ask yourself why you don't know them or you don't know any.
And make sure people know that your working environment, or you might need to work on your work environment such that it is a safe place for everyone that applies on staff. If you're reaching out to me about a job offer and I hear from later that day that I would just be taking the spot of the one woman who was fired from that job, I'm not taking that job. This is a huge network of people and we're all talking to one another. So please be aware of that. Don't just hire someone because you want to fill the slot, like Jer said. While the audience is formulating their questions, I just want to return a little bit back to the question of pushing away trans and non-binary people. Why do we see non-binary people being pushed out of jobs, jumping from one corps to another, having one-year contracts? I want to interrogate that a little bit before we get into our question period.
I mean, sometimes it only takes one hostile staff member to push someone from one corps to a different corps. Lots of people I know have left corps just because of one person who made them extremely uncomfortable. That's all it takes in a lot of cases.
And I feel like in a lot of those cases, that one person typically is somebody who is a soloist or very looked up to. And, like I marched with somebody who said that women shouldn't be leaders because that would make them B word. So you shouldn't give them leadership positions. And, like everyone, like a lot of people heard him and that like went around. And then at the end of the season, he was like super, super honored, like incredible member, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, incredible to who? Like to a straight white man? Yeah, probably. But like every woman in the horn line was kind of really upset with him over that. And he would say things like that constantly. But like, and he was I think he was a rookie too. It was like a rook out. So I think on top of that, it's not even like he had the clout of like a 6-year vet. It was like, why is it so consistent that people like that get this like type of credibility and that stuff's not addressed? And as somebody, like I almost didn't march in 17 because there's so many instances of that coming out of the members, where I was like, I don't want to be surrounded by people like this. Even it outweighs the good people that I met. And then I realized they all aged out, so I like went back in 17, and it was much better that year. And then like meeting the people in 18, like it seems that culture has like aged out. But at the same time, it's like that culture shouldn't have been there in the first place. And I feel like that's what causes people to get pushed away. It's like not necessarily the whole core might not be the problem, but the fact that the whole core is complacent with people who say things like that. And, it's just, well, he's the only screamer we got, so we have to keep him on trumpet, or he's the only, like, no one else can really play that solo, or like if we just ignore it, it'll go away. Like, I feel like that's like kind of a culture that, causes trans people to just keep a distance from the activity or from certain cores, or hop from core to core.
Because if we like speak up, like it's like we're the only ones speaking out, and then we can either get rid of that person who's being problematic and pick another soloist, or we can get rid of the people who are pointing it out. And it's just like, as like, you just think like, do I want this target on my back, or do I want to just finish out my summer? And then that person stays, and then no one else says anything.
Yeah, I want to pull this together with a common theme from our other town halls, and it's been allyship looks like being friends to people who are being socially ostracized. VL touched on this earlier. It's impossibly hard to be the only trans person in your core, or one of two trans people in your core. So as an ally, go sit with that person at lunch, be friends with them, make a connection with them. It makes a world of difference in a person's experience to have at least one person that they can speak with and be friends with throughout that whole summer. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so I think we're going to wrap up. First, thank you to all of our incredible panelists for sharing their knowledge and their experiences for the benefit of our viewers. I want to recognize their participation as a form of labor and thank them accordingly. And second, if you learned something this evening or enjoyed our discussion, please consider donating to Mason at mason.net/donate. We use donations to compensate our panelists and to cover operating costs. Third, be on the lookout for some really exciting Pride Month announcements later this week. Happy early Pride. It's like Pride Eve. As part of that, here's a reminder that our trans discussion circle will take place on Monday, May 31st at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. This event is by and for trans community members only. Mason will generate action items and recommendations for marching arts ensembles as they emerge from this discussion. So be there. Please register in advance using the Mason link tree. And I'd like to extend one last thank you to our panelists and our audience for being here this evening. We wish you a great rest of your evening. Be well.